TikTok, the site that keeps on giving. And Twitter, the place where I bow my head in shame. Today we are responding to a left-wing TikToker who is comparing both Biden's and the quote-unquote GOP tax plan. Let's see if I can avoid an aneurysm unlike the last TikTok I debunked.
Which of these two tax plans sound better to you? President Biden wants to tax the 0.01 percenters. That would bring in nearly $1 trillion into the federal government to pay for vital programs.
Okay, she only said one sentence, but it's already pretty misleading, and I doubt she knows why. She's talking about a tax proposal from Biden's 2023 budget that, if passed, will target households with a net worth of at least $100 million, slashed to 0.01%. A 20% tax will be applied to the total income of the 0.01% per year. But what makes this kind of unprecedented is that unrealized capital gains will be taxed. At present, taxes are paid on capital gains when they are sold, but Biden's proposal would tax these investors even if no profit was made. Forbes has a pretty good explanation for how this works. In their example, if a targeted household stock worth $500 rose to $900, they would have to pay a tax based on the difference of $400. This is pretty unfair, as argued by both Republicans and Democrats, since these investors will not receive any disposable cash to spend, but still owe tax payments for money they don't currently have access to. Proponents of the bill may argue that billionaires are taxed at 8.2% on average, thanks to capital gains rates being lower than income taxes, but I would argue that we should instead lower income taxes at a similar level. Of course, illiquid holdings like business or real estate wouldn't have to pay the full tax but owe an annual deferral charge. So Biden isn't completely senile. Forbes also elaborates that as this is a minimum tax of 20%, wealthy households who pay their 20% won't need to pay additional taxes. But if a wealthy household paid 15% in taxes, they would need to pay a further 5% to reach the 20% threshold. Regardless of what you think of this policy, there is heavy opposition to the point that it will unlikely pass in Congress, according to some experts. Democrats have razor-thin margins in Congress due to skepticism of moderate lawmakers towards the minimum tax. To make matters even worse for Biden, the swing vote Democratic Senator Joe Manchin has called it a tough one and preferred alternatives to taxing wealthy people. When it comes to the law, Biden may face possible legal challenges and constitutional issues, and even solving that, the overburdened IRS will find it difficult to enforce the tax policy, especially with illiquid non-tradable assets. Moreover, it's hard to value small business assets above $100 million, and Europe have failed to deliver similar tax proposals. You may retort with, but Taran, at least we are advocating for compassion to lift the poor with more funding for vital programs. What do Republicans have? Dog whistling about critical race theory? Well, let's talk about policy.
Biden wants to tax the 0.01 percenters. That would bring in nearly $1 trillion into the federal government to pay for vital programs.
First off, the billionaire minimum income tax has been estimated by the Biden administration to raise $360 billion over the next decade, not roughly $1 trillion. She of course got that figure confused with Biden's entire 2023 budget being estimated to cut the deficit by $1 trillion over the next decade. So let's check that out. Biden's estimate of $1 trillion cut in the deficit reveals a major flaw in his plan, that it will make very little difference. The Biden administration has one more estimate, that the deficit will still grow by $14.4 million in the next decade. The deficit cut just refers to the debt growing at a smaller rate by $1 trillion. And this isn't mainly due to new stuff like Biden's climate agenda. It's Social Security and Medicaid, growing without intervention. Sure, discretionary spending, like defense, is projected to get $8.5 trillion, but they are dwarfed by estimates of $17.2 trillion for Social Security and $12 trillion for Medicare over the next decade. That is not to mention other programs like Medicaid. The US doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. A bipartisan one at that. And that $1 trillion deficit cut? That is mainly because emergency pandemic relief and stimulus expires, as well as recovery from COVID, which would occur under Biden or the Republicans, so isn't exactly a unique achievement, even if it's a prediction. Back to Biden's billionaire tax. There are also concerns that Biden's tax reforms will hurt ordinary people despite Biden stating otherwise. American taxes initially intended for the ultra-wealthy have a history of expanding to the middle and lower classes, such as the income tax. Apparently the same thing happened with the alternative minimum tax, but I haven't found anything to verify this yet. Anyway, the income tax was instituted back in 1913, and the highest rate was 7% for income above $500,000, meaning it only applied to 1% of the population at the time. But as we know, it expanded to a much larger population in the modern day. I admit, this may be an arbitrary and unlikely point, so I will appeal to the TikTokers' concerns about higher taxes. Biden claimed he wouldn't raise taxes on individuals making more than $400,000, but it's misleading as it refers to families. It would be so strictly enforced that if married couples filed separately, they will have a 2.6% increase. Besides, small business owners making just over $400,000 aren't that rich, raising questions whether it's really fair. So to conclude for Biden's less than stellar budget and tax plans, they are unlikely to come to fruition in the near future, very unlikely to generate the desired revenue because it is very hard to enforce, has ethical and constitutional problems, and is not very effective on deficits.
Or we could go with the GOP plan as authored by Senator Rick Scott. He wants to reduce taxes on the rich and raise taxes for those families making only $50,000, and he wants to raise their taxes by about $4,500. Which one do you think the American people will like better?
What she is referring to is a policy proposal / goal in Republican Senator Rick Scott's 7-point document on what he believes Republicans should campaign on for midterm elections. In page 35 of this document, he states that he wants all Americans to pay some level of income tax, regardless of how small it is, because he thinks all Americans should have a stake in America and care more about its success. Scott claims there wouldn't be tax increases, but even he admits in his own document that millions more will have to pay taxes. This significant change from his policy stems from the fact that 57% of Americans didn't pay any federal income taxes back in 2021, or 44% who didn't pay any in 2019, before the pandemic, lockdowns, and high levels of emergency federal aid. The reason this percentage is so high is that either they don't earn enough to pay tax, use tax credits to offset their tax payments, or are seniors who are retired and no longer working, which explains the projected high tax increases from Scott's plan. Now, I think it's pretty clear for the Democrats to exploit the senator's lapse in judgment, but that doesn't mean it's not intellectually dishonest. This policy is not part of the GOP's tax plan. In fact, Scott asserts that this is his own plan, and does not represent the Senate GOP conference or the National Republican Senate Committee, despite him leading the campaign arm of the Republican Party. Many Republican colleagues have rebuked him, including Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Rick Scott is one guy with little to no support for his tax plan from high-ranking members of the GOP, and gained criticism and disapproval from those in the right, including me. So no, the GOP tax plan will not raise taxes because there is no official GOP tax plan yet. This was only a 37-second clip, but the amount of misinformation took what I assume, as I am writing this script, 7 to 8 minutes to debunk. As an advice for both sides, don't believe every talking point or headline you see from Facebook or Twitter. Go through one of these articles from time to time and actually fact check your sources. The amount of idiocy, as we have seen from Biden and Rick Scott, is bipartisan. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give a like and comment, as it really helps my video in the YouTube algorithm. And if you like economics and political commentary, consider subscribing. Maybe follow me on my Twitter, and see you later.